Well, good morning and Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning. And I'm joined this morning, as always, by my dear teacher and friend, Rabbi Marc Gellman. Marc, good morning, and how are you?
I'm great. Good Shabbos, Eddie.
Good Shabbos to everyone. I hope that you're taking very good care. Here in Los Angeles, the sun is shining. It's a beautiful day, and they're telling us that we don't have to wear masks outside. So I'm going outside as soon as I can finish shul this morning, and it's delightful to be enjoying, to breathing some air again. So thank you for being around. Thank you for sharing Torah with us this morning. The Torah this morning begins with a geography lesson. And here's the geography lesson I'd like to start with. The book of Exodus, the second book of the Torah, is a book about our identity as Jews. It is the book that carries with it the two great events that define the Jewish identity from the very beginning: the enslavement of the Jews in Egypt and the exodus from Egypt, and our moment of revelation at Mount Sinai. And if you open up the book, and most importantly, if you open up the table of contents, you will see that the Torah portions that we read in the book of Exodus form a perfect symmetry. There are 4 Torah portions which tell the story of our enslavement and liberation from Egypt, leading up to Beshalach, the story of the crossing of the Red Sea and the Song of the Sea. And then 2 Torah portions which talk about the revelation at Mount Sinai. Yitro and Mishpatim, we stood at Mount Sinai, we heard the voice of God, we received God's commandments. And then 4 Torah portions at the end, which talk about the creation, the construction of the Mishkan, of a shrine that will carry God's presence along with us wherever we go, first in the desert and then in the world, fulfilling God's commandment, Asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, make for me a holy place and I will dwell within you. And the 4 Torah portions, Truma Tetzaveh, Vayakel Pekudei, are mirror images of each other. Truma and Tetzaveh are God's commandments. This is what I want you to build. This is what the vestments of the priest will be. This is the furniture of the Mishkan. And then the last 2, Vayakel Pekudei, tell us that Moses did exactly what God had commanded him. And at the very end of this story, Pekudei, Moses, as it were, turns on the Mishkan, God's presence fills it up, and the Mishkan is complete. So we have a perfect symmetry. 4 Torah portions tell us about our enslavement and liberation. 2 Torah portions tell us about the revelation at Mount Sinai. 4 Torah portions tell us that we have created the first institution, the first human artifice that could carry divinity into the world. We carry Mount Sinai with us. So the liberation is complete because we carry God with us. Only one small problem. There's an 11th Torah portion, which takes this beautiful symmetry of 4, 2, 4, which adds up to 10. 10 is one of those holy numbers, and messes it all up. And that 11th Torah portion is jammed in to this week's reading between Truma and Tetzaveh, the commandments to build the Mishkan, and Vayakil Pekudei, the fulfillment of those commandments, jammed in to the story of building the Mishkan, building the shrine, is this Torah portion. And this Torah portion fits none of that. Because this is the portion in which Moses goes up to the mountain to receive the tablets written by the hand of God. And while he's up there, the people Israel build a golden calf. They are so terrified that man Moses, that's how the Torah puts it, that man Moses is gone. They go to Aaron, they gang up on Aaron, they say, build us a golden calf. Was Aaron complicit? Did Aaron encourage this?
Yes.
How long can you play second fiddle to your younger brother before you say, damn, it's my time, I'm going to be in charge now? Or did Aaron try to hold them back from this horrifying sin? We don't know. That's the midrash.
Sounds like a streaming episode on Netflix.
Could be.
Aaron and
Moses comes down the mountain, sees the golden calf, throws the tablets, smashes them onto the rocks. destroys the calf, grinds it up, makes the people drink it, moves the Mishkan outside, moves the tent of meeting where he meets God outside of the camp, because God doesn't want to be anywhere near this people. And God says to him, I ain't going with you no more. I'm not going with you anymore. This people doesn't deserve direct experience of my presence among them. I'll send an angel. I'll send a guy. I got a guy who'll take you into the land.
I know a guy.
I ain't going with you. And Moses says to God, you don't go, I don't go. We'll die here together in the desert. And God says, all right, I'll tell you what, you'll do tshuva on behalf of this people. I will go. And God changes God's mind. And then Moses says, there's something about this God that is different than all the other gods that one meets in the world. There's something about God, this God who is different than all the other authorities, because typically kings, emperors, rulers don't change their minds like this. They don't accept tshuva. They don't turn. And Moses says to God, Hareini ekvodecha, show me who you are. God says, you can't see me and live. He puts him in the mountain. He passes by. And we get a revelation, Moses' personal revelation, his personal revelation of God's presence in the world. That's what's in this Torah portion. And it's the portion that doesn't belong, because it takes away the beautiful, smooth kind of telling of the story, especially the Mishkan, and throws in this warning about building institutions. The question is, how is the golden calf different than the Mishkan? The Mishkan is made out of gold, and the golden calf is made out of gold. The Mishkan has mythical figures, these two kruvim, these angels that sit on the top of it. The golden calf is a mythical figure. The Mishkan is the place where one comes to worship God, and the golden calf becomes an object of worship. That's the biggest difference. It's not in the object itself, but it's the way that the people treat it. They look upon the symbol as sacred in itself and not a reference to something beyond it. They worship the symbol, the idol, the calf, the symbol becomes the God that they crave. The great scholar Joseph Campbell talked about people who embrace the symbol instead of what it's pointing to. He says it's like a person who goes into a restaurant and eats the menu, because doesn't realize that there's a difference between the symbol and that which it points to. Doesn't realize that the symbol is only instrumental. Symbol becomes wrapped up with all this energy and this reverence, and it in itself is treated as something divine. And this is something we human beings do all the time. So there's many aspects to this story that we'd like to touch on today. Let's begin with the first one. The golden calf is a piece of art, as was the Mishkan. And the wonderful thing is that, well, we Jews, we have a very ambivalent attitude toward the visual arts. You walk into a great European cathedral, and you see the art on the wall, the architecture about you, the sculpture that surrounds you. Even the nicest synagogue in the world doesn't hold, you should excuse the expression, doesn't hold a candle to a European cathedral. Marc, what is it with us Jews and art?
Well, look, that's a wonderful little summation. Not so little, it's profound what you just did. And I like Kitisa not only because it interrupts symmetry of the Torah, but also because it has such deep theological issues in it. There aren't that many parshiot that have real theological issues, because the Torah is not a theological book. There's a theology implicit in it, of course, but you have to dig it out. But occasionally, like panning for gold, sometimes a little vein of gold comes to the surface, and that's what Kitisa is. It's gold. I love this parsha. And one of the reasons I love it is it raises questions about whether we can worship an invisible God, whether we are humanly capable. of believing the truth of Judaism and the teaching of Judaism, that, as we read in this week's Parsha, no man may see me and live. That God is invisible. God isn't a person. That's why I wrote my first children's midrash collection, Does God Have a Big Toe? As a kind of a tweak. No, God doesn't have a big toe. God doesn't, and that's just the shape of God. Then that's called anthropomorphism. Then there's anthropopathism, which is a big 25-cent word, which is ascribing human emotions to God. That is, God was angry or God was jealous. What kind of emotions are those for a perfect, all-powerful, invisible being? It doesn't fit either. So my conclusion is that people are incapable of worshiping an invisible God. This is part of what I have referred to often in our discussions as the tragedy of the Torah, which is you're taking slaves, you want them to be free, you're trying to take Egypt out of them. And in the end, in the end of the Tanakh, certainly, they don't, they fail, they're exiled. So one of the things that God failed in was in God's belief that people could worship God's self. And it took 3 times for God and Moses to even give the Torah to the people. The first time God says, look, I'll talk to the people, I'll tell them what to do. And the people say, no, we're too afraid of you. There's thunder, there's lightning, there's all this stuff. And no, Moses, your guy, your man, you talk to Moses and he'll talk to us. And that's the fatal mistake. God wanted to have a direct relationship with the people, and the people refused. So Moses goes up the mountain, and then brings down the tablets, and then there's a second effort. The second effort is thwarted by the golden calf, and Moses gets angry. And there's some beautiful midrashim about this. The rabbis say, what happened was the sin was not the people's, the sin was Moses' anger. Because, the rabbis hated Moses. They didn't put him in the Haggadah. They were very suspicious of Moshe. So they said, when Moses came down and he got angry, the words flew off the tablets and he couldn't hold 2 big tablets of stone, and they actually fell out of his hands. And so then the next he goes up and he gets the other one and brings it down, and then it's put in the ark. So I disagree on one point you made about symbols. I know the Campbell point, and I believed it for years, but I don't believe it anymore, Eddie. I believe the distinction between a symbol that goes beyond itself and a sign, something that holds itself in it, holds the power in itself, an idol, is that great a difference. And the proof I offer is the way people in your synagogue and in my synagogue demanded that we walk with the Torah and touch the Torah with their talesim and kiss and touch and kiss. I was educated by old Germans, and they called them Yekis. And these old German Jews got a lot of stuff wrong, but they had a couple things right. And one of them was they thought that the Eastern European Jews treated the Torah like an idol. And the way we treat it, kiss it, put it in the ark, take it out, walk with it, touch it, they have a point. They definitely had a point. And I don't have to tell you, you teach children, you love children, I taught children and love them. And half of them I had to convince, no, I'm not God. I'm not God. I'm your rabbi. I'm not God. The little ones. So there's a need for something visible. When you look at the success of Christianity compared to Judaism, it isn't just anti-Semitism, which is a big factor that killed so many of us over such a long period of time. It isn't just the Edict of Constantine and the transformation of the Roman Empire eventually into a Christian empire. It's the great difference is the great success, I think, is simple. It's the symbol of the cross. The cross says everything you need to know about Christianity. Now, for people who are not that well versed in the Christian world as I am, you should know when you see a cross that's bare, you know that you're entering a Protestant church. But when you see a cross that has the crucified figure of Jesus on it, which is called a crucifix, then you know you're entering a Catholic church. And that in itself is another discussion for another day, the difference between the cross, which is the symbol of resurrection and hope, and the crucifixion, which is the symbol of suffering, that Jesus is suffering. But the cross, I think, for Christianity is critical. And I think for us as well, there is still a need for a visible religion.
What's the danger of a visible religion, though?
Idolatry.
I mean, that's the reason why you don't have a strong tradition of visual arts in Jewish culture is precisely because there was a deep fear of the power of visible symbols to distract from true faith, and a deep concern about the danger of visible symbols. So we're not allowed to have sculptures. We're not allowed to have figures, human figures in a synagogue. You end up with this sort of thing with of vegetation, and beautiful as it is and lovely and inspiring, but it's nowhere near the windows of Chartres, right? It's nowhere near the decorative arts that one finds in a Christian community, Christian worship space. What is the danger of embracing visual symbols as the core of faith?
Well, I said it's idolatry. That's right. But no one, and that's one of the unique things about our Torah study, is that we're fearless in bringing up stuff that other people may not want to bring up. The question that we have to ask is, what's the danger on the other side, Eddie? What is the danger of an invisible God, worshiping an invisible God? Okay?
Right.
And I think we can look to the answer to that at the Quaker Meeting House. The Quaker Meeting House is a room. It's a room. There's no symbols in it. There's nothing in it. And it's people talking and they share stuff. But it doesn't have the religious drama. Betty and I, when we were coming back from Israel, one of our early times together, back in, back in the early 70s, we snuck into Chartres, south of Paris, in the wheat fields south of Paris, and this great Gothic cathedral, and there was a service going on. And we snuck up into the upper areas, and the processional of the cardinals in purple, crimson, and the light was coming through the stained glass window. And I turned to Betty and I said, gee, they got religious drama right, and we got it wrong. There's not enough religious drama in the Jewish service. I mean, and when you look at the popularity of something like Central Synagogue's Friday night service, partly it's the room. They're amazing, sort of neo-Moroccan room. And Temple Emmanuel in New York is the same thing. So, I mean, when they came to my synagogue, they were coming to hear me. They come to VBS, they're coming to hear you. Now, that's good. It was certainly flattering. But it lacked drama. And when you just look at this in context, Ed, that we had priestly Judaism, which was full of drama, full of visual images. We talked about last week the high priest with the vestments and the golden turban, the white turban with the golden crown and the thing, and the light and the golden pomegranate bells. Oh my God, and burning animals. For heaven's sakes, it was just huge drama, maxed out drama. But when you look at the shtetls of Eastern Europe that we came from, there was nothing. There was nothing. And I think but it may not be necessary. And the proof that it may be possible to worship an invisible God is Islam. If you look at a mosque, there are also there's no art in a mosque. They follow.
There is art in a mosque. There's
Yes,
just no
it's
human figures. There's tremendous art in a mosque.
Yes,
the
it's
calligraphy and the art, the colors, the design.
Yeah, the design and the verses from the Quran. But there's no figures. And it's prohibited, even vigorously prohibited, to make a visual image of Muhammad. And that's their view. And so there's billions of them. And they're an active, growing, thriving religion without. Now there is Islamic art, but it's different than European art and medieval art, Christian art. But there's no great Jewish art. And that's the point I'd like to segue to whenever you want, which is, why are there no great Jewish artists?
Well, so what you're suggesting is that we lost something valuable in the development of our faith, of our religion, our religious culture, rather.
Unquestionably.
Because we lost a tradition of visual arts.
Yes.
And we lost that because we were so concerned of the problem of idolatry that once you paint a picture of God, then you limit the way one imagines and one embraces God. So let's just before we get to the question of why there's no art, and you've made the case that we've lost something, but I want to argue the other side just for symmetry's sake, which is, once you paint a picture and say God is a 33-year-old white Jewish guy with long brown hair, you look how many limitations you've placed. And what if you're female? And what if you're older? And what if you you have now excluded all of the, you've as it were defined divinity, God, in that one box. And what's of course worse, Marc, and you know this, and this is exactly what the Torah's point is in this Torah portion. Once God becomes the vessel of your fear and your rage and all of the darkest parts of human life, your aggression, and that's the God you worship, that's what you've poured into your idea of God, then you end up worshiping a projection of the worst parts of the self. And that's really the problem of idolatry. And that's the reason why the tradition was so adamant about not portraying God, and so adamant about not having human figures within the worship service, the worship space. So Abraham Joshua Heschel taught us that we are a tradition of time, not space. That the holiest cathedral the Jewish people ever built is Shabbat, a cathedral in time, not a cathedral in space. And that's the reason why there's no Jewish art.
Yeah, and that sounds right. It sounds beautiful, but it's not right, and it isn't beautiful, and it isn't true.
Okay, go ahead.
The fact is, you need this. And if you look at the religion of Buddhism, they don't have a belief in God at all. They don't have a belief in a creator God at all, Ed. And yet the figure of the Buddha is critical to the centrality of worship focus in the Buddhist philosophy, faith, tradition. So they have it. Hinduism has a million gods, and it's a very rich tradition. And I would point to you, because I have really changed on this point, and I'm willing to dig in on it. When I saw the Pietà first, I didn't think there's a white guy sitting on the lap of a white woman. Now, it could be because I'm white, and it could be because the marble isn't white. What I saw was the most beautiful expression of maternal love and the suffering and agony at the death of a child
Yes.
that I had ever seen and still have ever seen
Yeah, I've seen the same thing, and I agree.
in my life.
Or the yes.
I think there is a human need, just like we've talked often about how we're partly angelic, partly animal. We got two yetzers. We've got a spiritual and a physical. Well, I'm gashmiut here. I'm physicality here. I think, and it could be that my best friend was a priest. Okay, could be. Could be that afternoon in Chartres with my wife Betty. I don't know. But I'm telling you, people need something visible. They're not idolaters. They need something visible in order to focus their religious intensity.
And I want to push back.
Good.
And I do appreciate the Pietà is indeed every bit as moving as you say it is. And I think that the Jewish tradition's answer is yes, you can feel the maternal love and the ultimate tragic suffering in that moment. And it is beyond exquisite, beyond it. In the same way, by the way, that when you see Michelangelo's Moses, minus the horns, of course,
We were going to talk about
yeah, but you see the power of resolution in that man, the power of courage, of conviction in that image. Absolutely. But you see, that's again exactly what the Jewish tradition was trying to convince us of. There is only one. Heschel was beautiful about this. This is really, it's not that you can't create an image of God. There's only one thing out of world that you can create an image of God of. That's the fullness of a human life. The idea is that I see you and I see the image of God. And I see my children and I see the image of God. And I see my neighbor and I see the image of God. And yes, I see the enemy and I see the image of God. And the idea is not to limit it to somebody who looks like me or someone who acts like me or thinks like me. And that's the idolatry. The idea is to see the image of God within every human soul that comes before us. Don't forget.
Okay, and I push back again. This is like tennis. I push back again. There's plenty of black Jesuses in the African tradition. They don't represent Jesus as a white man. They represent Jesus as a black man. And in fact, he wasn't white. He was swarthy, Semitic, whatever he was. But he certainly wasn't white. And Tommy and I did a thing for Ted Turner for his movies, and we introduced all the movies on the Turner Classic Movies channel, and we introduced all their Jesus movies. And one, I called Surfer Jesus, where they had Rock Hunter and Flaying Jesus, and he, that was the classic Jesus. If you grew up in Milwaukee, that you saw, he looked like a Nordic god, and okay, that's and you're absolutely right to include the issue that women have with that. Because wait a second, what about us? But I don't think it gives full credence to pious Catholic women, modern pious Catholic women, who see in Mary a figure that they can identify with. So I don't see a single religion, including ours, with the kissing of the Torah, that has been able, except for the Quakers, that has really successfully been able, and maybe the Muslims, to do away with the physical representation of God in some way.
I think you're right. Look, and I don't disagree, because I think that you're pointing to something which is very valuable. And I think for those who are sharing this with us this morning, I think you need to understand that Rabbi Gellman's position is not widely held in the Jewish world, because I think because there's very few of us who are as honest as he is, and as willing to say irreverent truths as he is. But I'm going to continue to offer the counterpoint. I used to live in Texas, And in Texas, there's a very famous story that a bill came before the Texas state legislature authorizing bilingual education for children who spoke Spanish in Texas schools. And it was voted down because the Texas state legislator stood up and said, my God, if English was good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for the children of Texas. And they voted down the bill. If we're going to create visual images, they're going to look like us. They're going to look like us, and they're going to embrace all of the limitations and prejudices that we carry in the world. And the Jewish tradition didn't want that. The only image, and this Torah portion is really good about this. I mean, really, I want everyone to understand that this is not a tangential conversation. The Torah portion, because Moses says to God, Hareini et kvodecha, show me your essence. Show me who you are. The Torah portion itself is struggling with this idea of how do I think about, and let's use the right word, how do I imagine God? How do I imagine God? And what does God say to him? You can't see my face and live, but you can see my back. What the heck does that mean? It means I don't want you to have a visual image of me. And then what happens is he puts him in the rock, he passes by, and you expect the next line in the Torah to tell you what he saw, and it doesn't. It stops right there. Yeah. And instead it says, and he said, Adonai, Adonai, Rachum v'chanun, God who is loving and kind and forgiving. It is a verbal, an auditory experience that is described, a verbal, a word experience that is described, not the visual that Moses, it's such a brilliant construction of the text because it's trying to thread the needle that you're discussing with us, Marc. Moses wants to see God, and God says, no, I won't let you have a visual image of me because it's too small. It's too prejudiced. It's too limited. And that struggle between Moses's desire, which you're expressing beautifully, and God's response, or at least the way the Torah imagines God's response, let's use that word, is exactly the conversation we're having.
Right. And let me be completely clear about this. Let me be very clear. The fact is, I'm not arguing
it's God
that we should have a physical representation of God. Heaven forbid. Chas v'chalila. I'm saying we need some kind of visual focus in our service. And that visual focus for us is the Torah. For Christians, it's the cross, either the cross or the crucifix. But people need something. And the truth of Judaism, as I understand it, and as I teach it, is that you can't have a visual representation of anything about God except what God has done, God's footprints, if you will. And that's why I think we do agree. And it's okay. The Torah is not an idol. Ultimately, even if we hug it and kiss it and walk with it.
Yeah, well, that becomes an issue, by the way. That's not a small thing.
It can be, but it's not an idol because ultimately, what is it? It's a scroll. It's 5 books. It's a book. It's 5 books. So my point only is that we need focus, just like the statues of the Buddha betray the full teachings of Buddhism. So maybe walking with the Torah betray the full teachings of Judaism. Okay, but we have needs. We have needs for religious drama. And there is something
missing.
Profound. There's something missing in us, which I think we had to give up because we were persecuted and had to wander. We gave it up because we were courageous in sticking to the teaching that God is invisible. But we gave up stuff with that. Just like we've had this conversation about the sacrifice of animals. I'm happy that the priestly cult is gone, happy that the temple priestly cult can't be revived. I'm happy about all that. And yet, when we gave up animal sacrifice, we gave up something with it. We threw out the baby with the bathwater, and with it, we threw out the concept of true sacrifice. And so there's nuances on both sides, and the image of the golden calf brings us right into the heart of what do you need to see in order to believe.
And what are the dangers of seeing? That becomes the great issue. Listen, I'll confess one of my sins. When I was a young rabbi, it was my job to carry the Torah around the synagogue during the service, and I would carry it around, and I'd get tackled.
Yeah.
Because there were many of our friends in the congregation, people that I dearly love, but when they saw the Torah, they grabbed me. They wanted to pray with it. They wanted to touch it. They wanted to hold it. And I once got really angry because what I saw was no good. They knocked over a kid, a little kid waiting to kiss the Torah, and some person who should have known better either didn't see the kid or wasn't looking and pushed past the child and hurt the child. And I got very angry. And I said to the congregation, this is cloth, and this is metal, and this is parchment. This is not Torah. Torah is the words. And if you can't read this and you can't understand it and you can't bring it into your own heart, you're worshiping an object. You're not worshiping Torah. You're not worshiping God. And I shouldn't have done that because it was wrong for the person to hurt the child, of course. But you're right. People need something to hold in the world.
Let me offer in the close.
And by the Mishkan, I mean, so let's go back to the Torah for a second. Kitisa is in the middle of the discussion of the creation of the Mishkan.
Yes.
God tells us to build something physical. It's not itself God. It is a place of God. The tradition called it a footstool, called God Yoshev Kruvim, the God who rests upon the Kruvim. So it's not that you're imagining the Mishkan itself as God, but it is a place for God, a focus, a visual focus, so that one can focus one's soul, one's mind, one's heart on the religious encounter. Go ahead, please.
No, that's it. Look, I think there's really a lot that the rabbis got right. I'm happy we're in rabbinic Judaism, in the era of rabbinic Judaism and not biblical Judaism. I don't want an inherited priesthood. I don't want the temple sacrifice. But what I do want is for us to visit Chart, to put it in a simple two-word hope, that you should visit other religious traditions and see the drama that they create. I mean, there are Europeans from very austere Protestant churches who come to Manhattan every week to go where? To go to Harlem, to hear a gospel choir singing with emotion and passion. And that's not idolatry, that's pure. And they don't have that. And that's my plea, that there are things we don't have, that we have given up. And some of those things have positive spiritual consequences. Some of them, they all have dangers. And I'm happy we made the choices we made. But the religions of the world are like different climbers up the same mountain to God. And for God's sake, we need to hear the songs of the other climbers. We need to see the rituals of the other climbers. And we need to learn from the other climbers, because we are not on this mountain alone.
And I think that what you're asking for is not necessarily a recovery of Jewish visual art or visual religion, but something much more important, which is the passion that goes with it.
Yes.
I'll just tell you that one of the most moving religious experiences I had in my life. When I was a graduate student, I was studying in Jerusalem, and Nina was studying in Jerusalem. We were almost engaged at the point, and I would go to her apartment on Friday evenings to have dinner. And between my dormitory and her apartment, it was a long walk, a couple of kilometers walk. And I used to stop in one of the apartment buildings in the neighborhood. In the bomb shelter underneath the apartment building, they had a shtibel. It was a prayer place. Every building in Jerusalem and Israel has a bomb shelter in the basement, and thank God they don't have to use it as a bomb shelter very often. So what they do is, sometimes it's a kids club, it's a moadon, and sometimes it's a nursery for kids. In this particular building, they turned the bomb shelter into a shul, which means the walls were bare, concrete, bare walls. It was a folding table and folding chairs. And a whole bunch of these fellows would come into this, it was all men, would come into this synagogue, this bomb shelter synagogue. And I recognized them. You know who they were, Marc? They were the storekeepers and the janitors from the university where I was studying. And they were not the wealthy and the wealthy folks had a beautiful synagogue upstairs, in the neighborhood. These were the guys, these were the working guys of the neighborhood. But on Shabbat, they would take off their work clothes, the mechanics, and wash up and put on a white shirt and a pair of dark slacks and sandals, of course. And they would all become princes. And they would sing with such joy, Lecha Dodi. I mean, the Lecha Dodi, which is the great hymn of the Kabbalat Shabbat service, Lecha Dodi would last a half an hour in that shul. For they would sing it, and they would get up and dance, and they would dance, and there was such joy. Now, here was, contrary to your recommendation, there was nothing visual, because there was nothing. It was a bomb shelter.
But there was passion.
But there was passion, and Shabbos for that community was palpable, was tangible. Yep. The Queen Shabbat, and here's a visual image. The Shabbat is Kala, queen and bride, came into that room and blessed every one of those poor guys, those men who worked so hard with their backs and their hands and their aching knees all week long. But Shabbos came and lifted them up, and they could dance together. And I have to tell you, this is one of the most beautiful religious experiences I've ever had in my life.
That's beautiful. So the antidote, and what we can all agree on, our friends, Shabbat Shalom, is, look, we don't need idolatry, but we do need passion. That's what we're both in agreement on.
And something to focus it. I think that your question is a very interesting question. Something to focus the passion. In the same way that in all of these other prayer spaces, there's something to look at, and that excites the passion within. Well, thank you all for listening this morning. We want to wish you a very good Shabbos. Please be reminded that following our Torah study this morning, we have davening from Valley Beth Shalom, and this morning a special treat. Cantor Herschel Fox will be davening for us, but his daughter, Cantor Shira Fox, who is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful singer and cantor and leader and teacher of prayer, will be joining us. As well, my dear friend Jared Scoff, who's my rabbinic intern this year, one of two, Jared Scoff and Josh Jacobs, two wonderful young men. Jared's going to be teaching us Torah this morning, so stay tuned at 10 o'clock. Join us for that service. This coming week, of course, we study on Wednesday night. Last week, a marvelous session with Mr. Donny Massing on Israeli identity through Israeli music. So please join us on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. It's a marvelous, marvelous opportunity. And I wish you a very peaceful and sweet, good President's Day weekend. Marc, take good care.
Shabbat Shalom, my friend.
Shabbat Shalom.